A deep, rumbling drone. The distant hum of a war fleet in low orbit. The heavy, rhythmic breathing of something vast and ancient. The Hadron Dominion had ruled the stars for millennia. They had seen countless civilizations rise and fall, watched empires crumble beneath the weight of their own ambition. War was inevitable. And yet, in all their long history, they had never encountered a species quite like this. Humans. Weak by all conventional measures, no natural armor, no venomous fangs, no telepathic might. And yet, they thrived. Adapted. Survived. Now, the fate of an entire species sat within the cold steel walls of the Dominion's war chamber. A single cup rested on the table. A black, viscous liquid inside, a message, a warning, a death sentence. The Dominion believed this meeting would mark the beginning of humanity's end. They were wrong. Low, ominous hum. Alien murmurs fill the grand chamber. They called it the Black Gift. A substance so perfectly lethal that it was whispered about in hushed tones across the galaxy. A poison so refined, so absolute, that no being, no matter how resilient, had ever survived it. It did not burn or convulse its victims. No. It simply stopped them silently, irreversibly. A creeping paralysis, a slow suffocation from the inside, until the heart gave out and the body collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. A single cup sat in the center of the war chamber's cold, gleaming table, filled with the thick, viscous black liquid. It clung to the edges of the vessel like tar, shifting slightly, as if it were something alive. General Korik of the Hadron Dominion watched in silence, his mandibles flexing as he observed the human ambassador seated across from him. This was not a negotiation. This was a demonstration. A lesson in finality. The Dominion had conquered world after world, leaving behind only ruins and silence. And now, the humans had dared to resist. The ambassador should have known better. And yet, without a flicker of hesitation, the human reached forward, his fingers steady. He lifted the cup, swirling the liquid inside as if it were nothing more than a fine earth whiskey. He sniffed, paused briefly, then drank. The entire chamber stilled. Then, chaos. Hadron officers recoiled in shock, their subharmonic clicks and hisses filling the air like an oncoming storm. Some instinctively stepped back, as if the poison itself might leak from the human's flesh and taint the air. Others reached for their weapons, certain this had to be some kind of deception. But the human? He simply exhaled, smacked his lips, and nodded. "Not bad," he said. Silence. A slow, growing pulse of tension. Korik's mandibles twitched, a deep unease spreading through his core. He had seen warlords crumble, planets burn, entire species brought to their knees with just a few drops of the Black Gift. But this was impossible. "Prepare another dose," he ordered, his voice sharp, unyielding. The hesitation in the chamber was palpable. But soon, another cup was filled, this time, triple the strength. A dose so pure, so potent, that even the largest Hadron warriors had collapsed in seconds after ingesting it. Their bodies stiffened, lungs locking, eyes glassing over before their heads hit the floor. The human lifted the cup again, peering into the swirling black abyss. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, then downed it in a single gulp. Seconds passed. 5. 10. 15. Still, the human remained seated, his breathing steady. He leaned back, exhaling, and gave a slow nod. "All right," he admitted. "That one's got a bit more bite." Korik's grip tightened on the armrest of his throne. His mind raced. "How?" The human, as if reading his thoughts, shrugged. "No idea," he said casually. "Might be our liver. Might be gut bacteria. Or..." He tapped his fingers against the table, smirking. "Maybe our ancestors just ate a lot of really questionable food." Then, he grinned. "Want me to keep going?" A deep, resonant silence. The faint hum of alien machinery in the background. Korik had always considered humans an anomaly, annoyingly adaptive, but ultimately fragile. They had no natural armor, no venomous fangs, no hardened carapace to shield them. Compared to the Dominion's war-bred species, humans were soft, vulnerable. And yet, here sat one who had just rendered their most perfected weapon meaningless. Korik's mandibles twitched as he studied the human, searching for any sign of weakness. Trembling fingers, a flicker of nausea, anything to explain how this could be possible. But there was nothing. The human remained relaxed, steady, untouched. Finally, Korik spoke. "How many of you are like this?" The human stretched, rolling his shoulders. "Hard to say. Haven't exactly conducted a survey." He smirked. "But if I had to guess." He gave a lazy shrug. "Enough." That answer was more terrifying than any threat Korik had ever received. The Dominion had conquered countless species through absolute, calculated superiority. They understood biology, chemistry, warfare, every variable accounted for. But this was unknown. This was chaos. Then, the human leaned forward, his voice dropping just slightly, drawing the chamber into an eerie, suffocating quiet. "You ever hear about our history with poison?" Silence. Even the Dominion's warlords, beings bred for brutality, remained still. The human's fingers drummed idly against the empty cup. "Back on Earth, nature kept trying to kill us. Poisonous plants. Venomous creatures. Toxins in the water, in the food. And instead of rolling over and dying, we learned." He tilted his head slightly, as if remembering something distant, something ancient. "Some of our ancestors started drinking poison just a little at first. Then more. Until, eventually, what should have killed them just made them stronger." A slow, deliberate tap against the cup. "Guess it paid off." The tension is thick, almost tangible. A low vibration builds, as if the universe itself is holding its breath. Korik sat back, his mind racing. Everything had changed. For centuries, the Dominion had relied on the Black Gift as their ultimate weapon, a silent, absolute execution. But now, here was a human, sitting before them, smiling as if he had just tasted victory instead of death. Unacceptable. Impossible. And yet, undeniable. The human exhaled slowly. "You assumed this would kill me," he said. and when it didn't, you assumed it was a fluke. But here's the real problem: you assumed you could break us. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And you can't. The words were simple. Final. Korik's claws curled against the cold metal of his throne. He had ordered the destruction of entire worlds. He had commanded armadas that had blotted out suns, reduced civilizations to nothing but whispers in the void. And yet, in this moment, for the first time in his long, blood-stained life, he felt something crawling up his spine. A slow, insidious thing. Something he had never truly known before. Doubt. His voice was measured when he finally spoke, but the weight of uncertainty hung over every syllable. You believe this changes everything? The human's eyes glinted. He didn't answer right away. He let the silence linger, let it settle, a challenge written into the very air. And then, at last, he smiled. I know it does. A deep, heavy silence. The distant hum of warships in low orbit, engines thrumming like distant thunder. Korik exhaled slowly. The Dominion had plans, unrelenting, meticulously calculated war strategies designed to grind humanity into submission. Fleet formations, planetary incursions, economic strangleholds, all methods that had broken countless civilizations before. But war was a calculation. And if this was the cost? Korik's mandibles clicked as he studied the human across the table. You assume we will fail because others have failed, he said. That is a dangerous assumption. The human leaned back, utterly unconcerned. Maybe. He shrugged. But here's my counter-offer: stop trying to strong-arm us, and we find a way to work together. Because I guarantee, whatever you're planning. A slow, deliberate smirk. It won't end the way you think it will. Korik held his gaze. The Dominion did not retreat. The Dominion did not surrender. But this wasn't surrender. This was survival. His claws flexed against the armrest of his command chair before tapping a silent command. The chamber door sealed shut with a heavy metallic thud. Around the room, the Dominion guards stiffened, their weapons primed but waiting. Korik's voice was low. You believe yourself immune to our methods. But poison is not our only weapon. The human spread his hands. Of course not. You've got fleets, armies, entire planets under your control. Plenty of ways to make things messy. Korik leaned forward. Indeed. But you misunderstand the Dominion. We do not need to crush you in battle. We only need to make survival costly. A slight tilt of the human's head. That a fancy way of saying you're planning a blockade? Among other things. The human exhaled, rolling his shoulders, as if working through a mental equation. Then, after a brief pause, he chuckled. You know, I've heard this story before. Korik's mandibles twitched. Oh. Yeah. A couple centuries back, some other alien empires bigger and meaner than you tried the same thing. The human leaned forward, elbows resting on the cold steel table, eyes gleaming with something far more dangerous than arrogance. Certainty. Guess what happened to them? Korik already knew. They weren't around anymore. The rhythmic drumming of claws against steel. a distant, echoing pulse like a countdown to something inevitable. Korik's claws tapped against the table, a slow, methodical rhythm. The Dominion had the power, the resources, the firepower to win a war. But how long would it take? And at what cost? The human was offering another way. A way that didn't end in ashes. A way that didn't force the Dominion into a war of attrition against an enemy that would not break. Korik exhaled sharply. We will discuss terms. A grin spread across the human's face. Now we're getting somewhere. The chamber doors unsealed with a hiss of pressurized air. The guards hesitated, then lowered their weapons. The tension in the room didn't dissipate. Not entirely. But something had shifted. As the human stood, turning toward the exit, he paused at the threshold. Glancing back over his shoulder, he smirked. By the way, if you ever make another one of those drinks, a beet, add a little citrus. Could use a kick. And with that, he left. Korik remained seated, his mind racing. The black gift had been designed to bring death. And yet, the human had taken it as nothing more than a challenge. For the first time in his long, decorated career, Korik wondered if the Dominion had finally met something it could not conquer. The slow, rhythmic pulsing of an alien warship's engines. A distant heartbeat, steady, unyielding. Korik sat alone in the war chamber, his claws flexing against the steel table. The black gift had failed. Not because the poison was weak. Not because the Dominion had miscalculated its potency. But because the humans were something else entirely. Across the galaxy, empires had been brought to their knees, their leaders begging for mercy. But humans. They didn't beg.